Hey guys, welcome back to the Loopcast. Tom here. As many of you may have seen, there was an internal document within the FBI leaked that was trying to link Catholics to white supremacy, totally targeting specifically traditional Catholics. And so we had to figure out what was going on, so we went to the source. This week, we have an interview with Kyle Seraphin. He's a U.S. Air Force veteran and ex-FBI agent. He actually has been a part of multiple protected disclosures as a whistleblower within the FBI, and he recently was suspended as an agent in 2022. Kyle continues to expose corruption and left-wing influences within the FBI through his work. He describes himself as a Catholic father and husband, and American citizen second, and now distant third FBI agent.
Kyle Seraphin, welcome to Loopcast.
Thank you for having me on, Erica. I am ready. Let's rock and roll.
All right, let's do it. So today, as we mentioned in the introduction, we are discussing this document that you published, an internal document from the FBI office in Richmond with the ponderous title, which I will read aloud, Interest of Racially or Ethnically Motivated Violent Extremists in Radical Traditionalist Catholic Ideology Almost Certainly Presents New Mitigation Opportunities. So that's quite the mouthful. It sounds like a bureaucratic document for sure. And this document identifies fringe Catholicism, quote unquote, with a vulnerability to what I'll characterize as white supremacist influences. And just for the listeners who aren't familiar, here's a quick list of how the FBI tells us they will identify these radical traditionalist Catholics. Some of these characteristics could be that they attend the Latin Mass, the TLM, those who want to return to traditions from before the Second Vatican Council, Catholics who are typically critical of Pope Francis, and most importantly, of course, those who hold an anti-LGBTQ ideology. And the FBI is suggesting in this document that they could monitor these Catholics through the development of sources with access, including in places of worship, and cites a list of hate groups that was published by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So we have Kyle on today who broke the story. He published this document publicly, and you're going to help us understand what that all means and should we be concerned. So first of all, if you could just give our listeners an idea of what a document of this sort would be used for in an FBI field office. Why do they produce these? Is this a common kind of document? And how do they use this kind of thing?
Great question. Complicated answer. So the document is referred to as an intelligence product. And in this case, it's called a finished intelligence product. The two varieties being finished and unfinished. One is essentially raw information that is sort of put out with the speed and haste in order to disseminate. And then ones like this involve analysis. And so it's an analytical document. It has that ponderous title because it's kind of like a term paper. This is what Intel analysts do for a living. They write term papers that sort of assess what they would call the threat landscape, the threat picture, both nationally and then locally, in this case, in the area of operations around Richmond. So that's the short answer of what it is. And should we be concerned about it? Yes, of course, because the topic there is obviously a First Amendment protected activity. And the list of concerns that they had and how they would identify radical traditional Catholics also, if you dig further into the piece, includes their stance on abortion rights, which we know as Catholics is a no-go. So there are no abortion rights, it turns out. In fact, the Supreme Court has actually just stated that there are no federally protected abortion rights, and so it's up to the states to do the right thing. And I think we all kind of, as Catholics and more broadly as Christians, would advocate against abortion in general. So this is a very broad Christian perspective. The LGBTQ agenda is also something that is an issue for most Christians when it comes to being shoved down by the government. It does not say that we're not tolerant human beings, that we don't accept that people sin. I think we all do. But moreover, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be striving not to be sinning, and I think that includes all sins, not to just include, things that are against, this LGBTQ stance. So, which by the way is really weird because I grew up when it was just really, we just talked about people who were gay, and now 20 years later we've added this. There's a spectrum of things that we have to be concerned about and try to sort of help our children navigate, right? So, so this piece is, I think, a gateway. And it It's a gateway written by someone who's ideologically motivated, which is not uncommon for people in this position. The type of people that write these documents, they're generally very educated. They're relatively intelligent, you can tell, or at least write as though they are. And they're writing an academic topic, but they're also hiding some of the ideology that goes into their thought process, the biases. And we can tell that very specifically from the source selection. When you select the Southern Poverty Law Center as your primary source of identifying a group of people, you are already tipping your hand to me about what you think is important. And then when you double down and you say that your backup sources are Salon.com and The Atlantic telling you that rosary beads are a problem and that that's going to make you, part of the violent gun culture, tell me that you're a leftist without telling me you're a leftist is sort of the nice way of saying that, right? Because there is nothing about this that indicates these people have ever had any experience with TLM mass attendees, people who appreciate a pre-Vatican II perspective, which is, by the way, post-Vatican II, they didn't retract any of the Catholic teachings or dogma. They might have clarified some of the stances or made sort of a softer ecumenical push, but none of that stuff says that, Catholicism doesn't still consider itself the only true church and that we'd like to try to heal some of those divides and bring them in the fold of what Catholics believe. So none of those things are an admission. And I think that there's actually a really interesting swing back towards that in mainstream Catholicism right now. I think most people are looking at the evils that exist in this world. And you had a conversation with Mark Houghton. I did as well. Our conversation kind of centered towards the end on a very loud evil agenda. And I think it's evil because what it leads to unhappiness and disconnection from God. But that agenda is being pushed in this country. And it's being pushed by secular forces in the government, and it's being pushed back on by people in the Catholic Church who are looking for a more traditional look. And they say, it worked for 2,000 years. It worked for our forefathers who overthrew, radical dictatorships and who reformed our church and who, raided the beaches at Normandy. And they went to Catholic mass, traditional Catholic mass in Latin prior to storming those beaches on D-Day. So this is, I think, a really important point that there is a desire for that. I think one of the mistakes the Catholic Church may have made, a misstep, was trying to open the door to say, hey, look, we have a coffee bar and we have a really nice, donuts in the narthex. And the answer is not that. It's like, look, this is a hard path. There's a reason why it's difficult because it's against some of your human nature. And that's what you're called to do. So for me, more and more people are getting into that boat. I think a lot of people are going to go say, there was a trending hashtag that said RTC harder on Twitter, which is to say that there is a desire for this.
Right. And I think, one of the shocking things about the document was not so much that, mainstream Catholics necessarily identify with some of these groups, and I went through there are 9 hate groups listed in the Appendix D of the document that were on the SPLC website. You go through those and you're like, oh, those are kind of, some Catholics might say something like, well, they're not actually in the church or something. But I think that, like you were saying, we as Roman Catholics, no matter what kind of mass we go to, we're connected to these brothers and sisters, and we more than anything, should be identifying with them and saying, hey, if you put them on your hate group list, we're next. Like, we're right there with them in almost everything except like the See of Peter and all that. And I think everyone became an RTC Catholic over the weekend in a way.
That's
like
right.
You said with the hashtag, like,
well,
we are all RTC,
Exactly. And there's a historical perspective on this. The poem, and now I can't think of the writer it's attributed to, but essentially, they came for the fill in the blank and that wasn't me. So I said nothing. And you go down the list and eventually they come for you. So opening a door into whether they consider it fringe Catholicism, which is not the FBI's perspective, the government doesn't have a vested interest in any practice of any religion. It has to be agnostic about it. And so it's irrelevant whether they're fringe Catholics or they're mainstream Catholics or they're fringe Scientologists. None of those things are relevant in a constitutional setting. The answer is stay out of religion and stop trying to pick winners and losers in this fight, which is why we saw people like Mark Hout arrested, because they are trying to pick winners and losers in the abortion game, also not their perspective. And we didn't see even across the board enforcement of the FACE Act when people were interrupting mass in San Francisco last year or the year before. So these types of, so there were hundreds of, or at least 100 Catholic pregnancy centers or Christian pregnancy centers that were going to try to help women in crisis. So don't tell me that you have no vested interest. You are representing an ideological agenda. So that's number one. That's really dangerous. And then if people saw, I did a segment on Tucker Carlson for just a few moments, and his point was I'm not a Catholic, but I would defend anybody. And his reference was Scientology as well. It's straightforward. As Americans, and I think we can be, husbands and wives and children first, and we can be, Catholics second, but we're still Americans. We're all Americans, and we should be looking out for religious freedoms of everybody. That's the example that we should be trying to set. So it's very dangerous, and this is a terrible document. Like that's why the FBI rescinded it.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of leaning on that a little bit, I do want to return to the sources question, but I think we've covered that pretty well. But leaning in on the FBI's decision to rescind, and so it was actually, I think it was within an hour of the Jim Jordan hearings, the first hearings for the subcommittee on the weaponization of the government. Within an hour of those beginning that day, the FBI comes out with this statement, rescinding the document, retracting it. And this is from the National Press Office of the FBI. I'm just going to read the passage. While our standard practice is not to comment on specific intelligent products, this particular field office product, the document, disseminated only within the FBI, does not meet the exacting standards of the FBI, and the FBI is taking action to remove the document from FBI systems. And then you tweeted in response, the FBI does not confirm information. They confirmed this because they were called out, not because they would never approve it. They approved it and are embarrassed. This is the only way. And that was your response. So what do you think would have happened had you not published the document? Had there been no whistleblower moment? What would have happened?
I think this would have sat there on a server, and then somebody would have had the same idea, a parallel idea somewhere else, and they would have gone searching for this. Had there ever been any writings on this topic? And the answer would then be yes. So once you have it there, imagine like the original grain of a crystal. And, the way crystals grow is that they build cellular structure in a geometric way, off a single predicating action or a single predicating source. And so that's how you end up with this beautiful quartz structure. But it started from this single, crystallized, cell, and then they build outward from it. And that's what goes on with intelligence products. They build a body of work based on somebody depositing that original grain, and that granular focus allows propagation of more. And so once you because it's no longer fringe now that there's 5 products on it, right? So number one, it has to sit out there. Then somebody else can go out and write on the same topic, and they can find different sources, or they can source it based on what their analysis is in the news media of some event that happened. Well, this was a fringe Catholic. This was very hateful and this sort of thing. So once you can build a body of work, that becomes a source that you can reference when you open intelligence investigations. Intelligence investigations are not criminal. They are not criminal investigations in the least. They are not what people would be familiar with the FBI's work, because there are really 2 different parallel tracks. A criminal investigation is linear. It starts with a crime and it ends with either a guilty or a not guilty verdict or a plea. That's what happens. And sometimes there's a declination to prosecute, but essentially it's a straight line from one to the other, and either somebody goes to jail or they don't. But when we talk about intelligence, we're talking about a circle, and the circle starts from we initiated an investigation and it ends whenever or never. And the worst example of this is there was a guy in a Muslim mosque in Virginia who had an intelligence investigation under the counterterrorism banner, which is where this would have fallen, that was open for 23 years. And the final thing was they closed it when they charged him with a criminal case, and that was for child pornography, and it had nothing to do with the terrorism investigation because they'd investigated him for 2.5 decades. So these are the real dangers, is that you can use it to prop up an intelligence-only investigation that goes after your records, whether it be your bank records or who you're talking to on your phone or where you're traveling because of your Google account and so on. And those are information only, and it spins off other people that you know, and those people could be fringe, and eventually it can lead to criminal charges or nothing. It just leads to a file in the FBI's server on you, and that's terrible.
Yeah. So is there any kind of checks and balances with this kind of work in the FBI? Is there, if you have a file open for 20 years and you don't get anything, you have to close it, or is it just all sitting there?
It's all sitting there. The check and the balance failed in this case. So, I mean, that's not a good
the
answer,
answer
right?
I was hoping to hear.
No,
Yeah.
it's terrible. So the
I'm
answer
like,
is
let's do that. Yeah.
the answer is supposed to be that there's what's called a chief division counsel. That's going to be the top attorney in any given field office. There's 56 of them, and then they all work together with the Office of General Counsel to determine whether or not things are within the FBI's purview to investigate, and whether these the products and their sourcing and all the other things are in compliance with FBI policy, which is theoretically defending the Constitution. But in this case, that field office either neglected to fact check and neglected to oversee this document, or cleared it, which is worse. I'm not sure what's worse, actually. I don't know if it's worse that somebody didn't do their job or that they did their job and they thought this was acceptable. Either way, the so-called exacting standards of the FBI is I said this the other day about another whistleblowing activity we got involved in. It goes really simply. It's like if you make an allegation that the FBI has done something wrong, they say that is categorically false. That would never be the way we do it. And then you produce the receipts and you say, oh, well, in fact, it is the way you did it. They go, we are taking this very seriously and we're going to do something. But these are not good answers. These are terrible answers. How about transparency and not lying? But that is that's what you should expect. That's where we're at right now. That's the nature of the FBI. That is the nature of an agency. There's a cardinal sin when you work for the Bureau, and that's being embarrassment to the Bureau, which I'm a big embarrassment. But I'm sort of I'm sort of thrilled about that. That's sort of a badge of honor, right?
Seriously, like that's a sign you're doing the right thing if you're an embarrassment to the FBI. This is good. Now, that kind of leads me to another question. Last week when I was covering the story, I reached out to at least 4 high-level Catholic leaders in the country. And the answer that I got back from not all of them. So, for example, the Bishop of Richmond, Virginia, came out with a very strong statement yesterday condemning this document and demanding some kind of investigation by the FBI into itself, which we can only hope will be fruitful.
No, it won't.
For those
it won't be. Let's be real about it.
Yeah. Okay, let's just all be real and honest.
That's right.
But the response I got from almost every office I talked to was, oh, well, the FBI retracted it. So they're clearly working with us. They have our back. There is no need to make any public statement. What would you say to Catholic leaders who feel like, oh, well, it's all right. We don't need to do this. They're working on it.
They're wrong. That's wrong. I've had that's
wrong.
simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very simple. You are incorrect. Your attitude is incorrect, and you are not appropriately assessing the threat that exists in front of us. The FBI does not get to weigh in the culture wars, the so-called culture war, and they are. That's what they're doing. They're putting their arm on the scale, not just a thumb, but the entire hand and part of the forearm as well. They are plopping on a weight that leans on one side. And the reason you can easily know this, and I'm happy to provide sources for people that are in a bishop's office, I will give you access to people who are Catholics in the FBI who have called me and they are furious about this product because they also know what it means. This product was given to me without being too specific about my source, because I'm sure that the FBI is not so much interested in fixing the source, but they're trying to fix the leak. That would be their bigger issue.
Yeah.
And the person who did this is in a position to be one of the watchdogs inside the Bureau, was not related to the Richmond field office in any way, shape, or form. And he or she was highly concerned about this and is also not a Catholic. That should tell everybody what they need to know. If this was a concern of someone who was willing to probably risk their career over this, because that's how that goes. I mean, if you look what happened to me, I had my paycheck pulled because I had a problem with parents being monitored at school boards. It's not a thing that the FBI really embellishes. They're not, or they don't embrace it rather. Whistleblower culture is given lip service only, and it's totally run down in a witch hunt as the minute they can. They actually accused me in the security documents I had of being, what did they say? It was really funny. They said racist, sexist, and or homophobic. No further information, like no specific examples. Yeah, exactly. In the 6 weeks that I was in the office in 2022, that's what was my crime. And in that 6 weeks, I can tell you, I sat by myself in a cubicle and I just did paramedic training because they wouldn't assign me any casework. So I'm curious what sort of racist, sexist, and or homophobic things I was engaged in. I'm willing to answer for them. I don't think what's fun is that it's like, they don't have the receipts. They don't need it. They dislike people exposing what they've done when it's malfeasance. It's not an organization that has self-reflection, that looks in the mirror and says, maybe we could do better. It says, these seraphim problem. We've got to stop that. What they don't know is that I'm just going to keep cutting at them with a pocket knife like they're Godzilla and I'm at his ankle. So I'm going to keep, cutting. And my whistleblower groups are going to keep it
cuts.
as many cuts as I have. Yeah, whatever I have strength for. And the whistleblowers within the FBI are going to come to me and do the same thing. So that's what's important. And the bishops need to realize that this is a serious shot across the bow, because there is no guarantee that I would have visibility to this product. In fact, it's totally accidental. This was, I would say it's God's plan in many ways, in the same way that I'm connected to people that know to bring things to me so I can get them to Congress. And Jim Jordan's committee got this right away. They got it a couple of days after it showed up. I verified that it was a legitimate document, which doesn't take a lot of work from my end. And then it's on and on to Congress. So, they should take this very seriously.
Right. It's I'm feeling even more serious than when I began this conversation, just listening to you. So
here's the thing: we can still be lighthearted people, and we live in this world. You can't live in fear, right? There's no reason to live in fear, but you should be aware. And the awareness is that there are a lot of bad things that are working against, I would say, Americans in general. Like the majority of this country is Christian in some denomination, and this is a big problem because we're not on board necessarily with the two agendas that are being pushed. Like I said, the two most obvious ones they try to line it up under anti-Semitism. It's like, I don't know if you saw that, but that was literally what they said.
Yes.
They said members of the radical traditionalist Catholics who reject Vatican II, right? In this note, they say there is a disdain for most of the popes since Vatican II and a frequent adherence. This is a real bold claim, a frequent adherence to anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ and white supremacist ideology. Give me a break. I don't know a single white supremacist Catholic. I've never met one. I've been a Catholic for 41 years. Like, come on, help me out here. In fact, the Klan used to hang Catholics.
Right. We were a target of white supremacists.
Correct.
And in fact, I was looking on the SPLC's own hate groups listing, and they will characterize white supremacist groups as anti-Catholic.
Correct.
And so it's just crazy. And it's this deliberate attempt to associate religious belief with the two worst labels, right? What are the two worst labels you can be handed? And you were handed a couple of these, but it's either you're racist or you're homophobic.
Correct.
And it just seems...
It's aligning you with bigotry.
Right. And it's just associating in their mind Catholics, bigots, Catholic bigot, Catholic bigot. And we see it in big tech. We see it in big pharma. We see it in big government. I did want to lean into your whistleblower. It's sort of a tertiary vocation that you've discovered, being a whistleblower nice way of saying for the FBI. And you're baptized. That's your primary vocation. Husband, secondary, whistleblower, tertiary. It's good. So this is something I actually asked Mark Houck too in our interview about the way that Catholics view the military, public service, the FBI. There's a long history in our country, especially after the Italian and Irish immigration periods, of the men in blue are vast majority Catholic. Here in the Northeast, vast majority of firefighters are Catholic. Policemen are Catholic. And I know there are a lot of Catholics in service in the FBI itself. How do Catholics balance that culture of service to country, obedience, laying down your own opinions, and then the danger of falling into this, I'm just following orders? And what inspired me to ask this was on your YouTube channel, I think it's your YouTube channel or online, there's a video of you talking about when the FBI agents do their training, they're taken to the Holocaust Museum for a day. And they have to confront what happened when all of these, Nazi collaborators, when the men in blue just put their heads down and did their job. And you have to look at what happened there. So how does a Catholic think about these guys who are just doing their job? They're just arresting Mark Houck at gunpoint and they're approving these documents. What do you have to say to them?
Well, I say they're violating their oath. It's very simple. There are three things that you must refuse, whether you're in the military, and I served in the military, or whether you're, and I was enlisted. I didn't have any authority. I was at E3 when I got out.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. I was
a 31-year-old guy who had a 19-year-old roommate that refused to buy toilet paper. So I know what it's like to go and just be like the lowest guy on the totem pole, right? And here's the way that it works. It's quite simple. You must You are compelled to refuse illegal, immoral, and unethical orders. Period. That's it.
Wow.
It's very easy. Illegal, immoral, unethical, that's it. You cannot do those things. And that keeps you from being someone who leads to a potential genocide. And so I was very hopped up on energy and a little bit of fear and probably like a little bit of, concern for my family's safety. That day that I did that interview, and then you're referencing my pinned tweet that's actually on Twitter, and people are welcome to go and check out, shameless plug, but my handle is below. You can go and see this thing. It's 2 minutes long. It won't take a lot of your life. My buddy did kind of a supercut of an interview I did with Dan Bongino, who's a wonderful friend to me and FBI whistleblowers in general. And the deal is this. It goes, I had just sold my house and moved my family into no house. We had no house. We moved and my wife literally packed up our kids at the closing table and drove to Arizona to go stay with my folks because that's the only place we had. And we're still there. That's where my RV is right here. So I'm sitting in Arizona at not my house because I don't have a house because that's what had to be done. And then I jumped on a plane and I flew to Dallas and I stayed there overnight. And then I flew to Miami and then I got in a car and they drove me up and I sat down with a man I'd never met before face to face that I'd heard on the radio. And I told my story. And that was like the last 10 minutes of my story. And he chopped it up into like a 2-minute supercut of it. But essentially, by the end of 2 hours, you're pretty wild out. Like you're round up. Like I was ready to go. I was like, man, I'll do another 5 hours of this stuff because there's so much that's going wrong. And also the energy of the fact that like my family is now in a no man's land. And that's still the case. The consequences may be very difficult for you, but that's what you're called to do. It's very easy. Correction. It's simple, but it's not easy. That's more accurate. It's a simple decision, but not easy. There's no choice but to refuse these types of things. You don't have an option to say, well, I'm just going to keep my paycheck. You've already been trained. Everybody in the military is trained to refuse an unlawful order. And it goes beyond that. It goes illegal and immoral and unethical. And if you don't do those things, then you are in violation. So you have to. That's why Catholics are so
even if it's the end of your career.
Right. And you can do the same thing. If a priest came and told you something that was against the catechism, that was factually inaccurate, serving their own interests, and they had, fallen astray somewhere, you would have to know, first of all, you have to know what is legal, what is moral, what is ethical. You have to have done that examination of conscience. You have to have already decided what that red line is. So if somebody within the church came and told you something that was antithetical to, 2,000 years of history and tradition, you have to say no as well. It's not
right.
difficult to discern that, but you have to put in the work beforehand. And if you don't, then you find yourself victim of, I'm just following orders because I didn't think about this beforehand. I'm backpedaling it, and you just keep backpedaling, and then you end up, the guy who's loading up, boxcars of people. And that's a visceral understanding to watch that line. It's scary.
Yeah. And I love the parallel that you draw there. It's a parallel between, right, the cost of discipleship, that there's no such thing as cheap grace, to use Dietrich Bonhoeffer's analogy there. There's no such thing as cheap grace. There's no such thing as easy Christian discipleship. In the same way that if you're really serving your country, there's no such thing as cheap service or a cost-free military service. It's going to cost you something. And like you said, the importance of our military members, of our intelligence service, of the men who are given and women who are given such power, like these FBI agents, to just hold files on us for 20 years, that those people have that formation and that conviction. So yeah, that helps me think, instead of just, trashing on, military and FBI and like, oh, they're just weaponized and all that, but thinking, what would it take to resurrect our public service offices and bureaucracies, as it were? And so I did want to ask you, what would it take? What would have to change in the FBI for you to go back? Other than they invite you back, right? Because right now you're not invited, but what would have to change for you to take up that mantle again?
So betrayal is the thing when someone you trust stabs you in a place where you're vulnerable. And that's what I would call what the Bureau has done to a number of people. I'm not, I'm one representative of it, and I'm out there publicly talking about it, but it's a vast number, it's dozens and maybe more, but dozens that I'm aware of. So I don't want to go back and work for the FBI because I think it needs to be abolished. It's an eye of a needle situation at this point. Like how do you fix it? It's like, okay, well, you tell me somebody who has the political will to go and fire every single SESer and every single GS-15 and then interview every GS-14 for their job, and the 13s all get re-educated. That's really, really hard to do. And so people who know the federal work scale, the SESers are what we would call the senior executive service. That's all. They're the top end of the pay scale. They're like $200,000 plus $225,000 jobs. They're all the people that you hear about being on the 7th floor of the Hoover building, and also the people that run every field office. So that's who the SES ranks are. The people below them are the assistant special agents in charge and the section chiefs and the unit chiefs. And, they're the top of the government scale. They're GS-15s. They max out the pay rate. And for the Bureau, that's like $172,000 a year if you're in most areas. It's a decent paycheck, and they all said yes when they could have stepped up. Like none of them are coming out as whistleblowers, and they would have a lot of authority if they did, because people would have to listen to them. Time, tenure, et cetera. So what you are seeing are people that are my tenure, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years. Very, very few people who have 25 years of service are coming in because they've been saying yes for a very long time, and they're compromised. That's my take on it. I remember what I was going to tell you. Tim Gordon mentioned things about red and white martyrs, and I wasn't familiar with the distinction of them before, but I think I am now. Our ancestors in faith like literally went down into the catacombs so they could celebrate mass, and all of us, and I pushed back against it. But at the end of the day, my choice was I'm not going to go into church where we can't go into church. And that happened in 2020. They shut down the churches. Where were the pushes of our bishops, of our parish priests who were going to disavow the orders of an unlawful and overreaching government to celebrate mass? Literally, people have died over that, and people have died over that in the last 100 years. My instructors, when I was in 5th and 6th grade, they escaped underneath the Iron Curtain. They were under threat of machine gun and German shepherds, and they went over barbed wire fences to get to America so they could celebrate the mass. So people have put their life on the line to celebrate mass, and we gave it up. We, I say collectively, as a country, walked away from those principles very, very, very easily. Over what? Like let's say it had a 5% kill rate, this virus, which it didn't. But wouldn't that be a good way to go out? Like, isn't that a good way to go if you're in your 80s? Because that's who was dying for the most part, 65 plus. If you're 65 plus, you're retired. You've produced offspring in this world who are now living, and you show the example of like, I'm going to mass regardless of it. And if that means that God takes me, then he does. I think that's a moral victory. That's like as my brother used to say, that's like a surfer getting eaten by a shark.
It's a noble end.
You're doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing. You are in the place you're supposed to be. And if that means that you no longer exist on this plane, so be it. It's hard to imagine that as a father, but like I have 3 children and they're in the world, and I know they will be okay because they're good little people. And so if that means I'm going to die of a virus because that's what has to happen, so be it. Like, we're going to go to mass. And we didn't do that. So for me, that was a small representation that everybody was willing to accept a lot of compromise. And we all need to do that examination. It can't happen again. You've been tested. You got hit in the face. It's time to get up, wipe off the blood out of your nose, and then never do that again. Never, under any circumstances. I don't care how scared you are. Because people have been eaten by wild animals, and they have been crucified upside down over this sort of thing, right? I mean, that's the thing that we seem to have lost. Like, it's not supposed to be easy or free. And that's why I think the traditional mass is so important, and why there's an uptick in interest, because people are like, maybe it's not supposed to be easy. Like, correct, obviously. Everything that is, everything
so
everything
Jesus
that's
said.
you know what I'm saying? It's like everything that is of value takes work. Like, none of Jesus' teachings are easy. They're, in fact, we're going to fail at them for our whole life. That's the whole point. You won't be successful in all of them. Exactly. Right.
Yeah. And I think too, people are always like, oh, the news is so negative and this is just so dark and all that. But I think once, and Mark and I talked about this too, once your priorities are in line in that way, and what I'm hearing from you is what was lost in the FBI was a matter of priorities, that somehow the survival of the bureaucracy became more important than what's illegal, what's immoral, and actually like upholding the Constitution, for example. And similarly in the church, comfort, and this is what we've always done, became more important than our final end, which is union with God in heaven. And our primary means of getting there is the Eucharist, right? Or the source and summit of that life with God is the Eucharist. But basically, it's not all dour and, oh my gosh, martyrdom and like you're so depressing and
No.
all that. But once your priorities are ordered, like you said, we're happy warriors because we're truly free, right? We're no longer slaves of this fear or this concern about political, like what someone will think about us in the FBI or someone will think of us at church or, if we wear the mask, we don't wear the mask or get the vaccine or don't get, but we're truly free. And that's joyful. That's the happy warrior, right? That the priorities are aligned. You're headed for
Yep.
heaven. God is with you, and He's won the victory. And
So there's three little
you
pieces
seem
to that.
me like a happy guy. Yeah.
People tell me I'm a really angry guy, but that's only because I just see the injustice. So there's three things to this. Number one, the FBI changed their priority set in their mission structure. People can go into the Internet Archives, the Wayback Machine, and they can see that when I signed up for the FBI, the number one priority and mission statement of the FBI, like every corporate mission statement, like they're all the same, right? They have this like kind of like lip service, but they tell you what they mean, and you should believe them. The first priority when I signed up was rigid obedience to the Constitution of the United States of America. It spelled it all the way out. Now that is the 10th priority. It's the last one on the list. You should know why. It happened in 2020, somewhere between September and October. People can go find the day that it switched over, like September 8th or something like that. But it was right before the election of 2020. I don't know why, but it's a data point, right? So that's number one. Number two, if you go to Mass and the sermon that you get or the homily that you are sitting and listening to does not make you uncomfortable about something in your life, you're probably not going to a Mass where they are being challenging. I only want to go to Masses that make me feel uncomfortable. It's weird, right? But like I'm a guy who lived like I was a combat diver. I joined the military to do hard things because I couldn't do them, and then I learned how to do them. And that's, I feel like, where we're supposed to be working. And if we are not being challenged, like if you go there and all you get is rainbows and sunshine, like I think there's a great place for comfort. There's a great place for making people not feel guilty all the time. But, there's a concept of Catholic guilt that's really important. Like we always, like guilt is what keeps us from doing shameful things. Yes, there's a reason.
Yes.
There always was. It's built into our psyche. We're supposed to feel ashamed of things that we do that are not well. And I felt uncomfortable on Sunday. The sermon that I heard was a discussion about anger. And my dad came in and he tapped me on the back and he goes, I didn't even tell Father Tom to talk about that. That just came up. Because I go to Mass with my dad every Sunday now because I'm staying with my parents. And what's so funny is Father Tom here in Payson, Arizona, who I'll just give a shameless shout out to, but Father Tom's a wonderful guy. And he's he's a brilliant homilist. And he always says, it's the Spirit is going through. I know he spends the hour of reflection for every minute that he speaks. And they are very tight. And they are almost always hit me right in the heart somewhere. And his discussion about anger was, it's like, yeah, I'm angry. I shouldn't be angry. I should offer it up, but I don't. And it drives me, but it's also something I should do better. We should all have something we're doing better every day. And we're all going to fail. That's the whole point of being a human being. We all know that. And that's what church used to tell us. That's what the Catholic Church used to tell us, but all churches used to tell us. You are failing. You are not living up to your calling. So step it up. That's your job. And then we will try to fail less. I fail less in the military. They say suck less. It's one of those things. It's like, you're not good at this, but suck less at it. And that's just a very colloquial, like meathead way of saying it, but it's true. We should suck less every day. And if you are just getting only affirmations, my wife was a marriage and family therapist and she went through a very leftist type of master's degree. If it's all, affirmative, then there's nothing to work on. So why are you even here in counseling? The answer is we're all here because we all have flaws. And some of us more than others. I have plenty. I've got a bunch.
Amen. Amen. Well, on that note, I wanted to thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your insight and your wisdom. Just as a fellow Catholic, thank you for your service to our country and to the church by your example. So we'll be praying for you and your intentions and your family. I know they've made a lot of sacrifices as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Erica. Yeah, I appreciate all the prayers. We need them.